Talking to some of the best names in contemporary Christian music. This is the Hope FM Artist Interview.
I'm very pleased to say that we have got a really lovely guy with us. It is the wonderful Austin French. Hey, Austin, how you doing?
Hey, I'm excited to be here. Excited to be talking to you.
Well, thank you for joining us on the show. I think it's your first time on Hope FM, so it's a double blessing for us having to share a bit about who is Austin French, where have you come from, what's your heart in the music, and also how's your faith been part of that journey from when you were a kid? I'm looking at you now, sir. You don't look all that old. How old are you?
I'm 27 years old.
27 years young. That's a fantastic age to be.
Yeah.
So catch us up then, because we haven't had you on the show before. Catch us up on the last 27 years, Austin.
Absolutely. All right, sit down for a minute. Here we go. Take a cup of coffee. And I grew up a pastor's kid. I grew up in Georgia in the U.S. and a small town. And my dad was a worship pastor at a big church in a small town. My mom was a music teacher, and she taught music kind of in our house growing up. So she taught piano and voice. I didn't know it wasn't normal not to sing all the time until, I started going to school, and they're like, man, you can't sing when you go to the bathroom. It's just weird,
Yeah.
And so, I kind of caught on that my family was a little different in how we were being raised and how I was growing up. Music was just in my blood, but also felt like church was in my blood. I came from a long line of church planners and evangelists and guys who traveled the country to tell people about Jesus. And my grandma, when I was 8 years old, gave me this journal, and she said, Austin, I want you to use this journal to write all your big God stories in it. And I didn't know what that meant as an 8-year-old kid. But the first thing I actually wrote in this journal when I was 8 years old, I went into my closet one day, got a pen, got my journal, and closed the doors, and I wrote the words, I will never be a Christian. I hated Christians.
Wow.
I didn't want to be one.
Just how old were you when you wrote that?
I was 8 years old.
That's an extraordinary thing for an 8-year-old to write. Wow. What a statement. Go on, carry on.
Yeah, and the big reason for that was my dad was the worship pastor at our church, and we were at church all the time, every time the doors were open. But the conversations that we would have as a family, I have 2 sisters and my mom and my dad, we would drive up to the church, and my dad would turn around and said, okay, we're at church. Hide the bruises, hide the scars, put a smile on your face. We're at church. And I was taught to perform like I was perfect, that my life was falling apart at home. And as an 8-year-old little boy, I didn't understand how the godliest man in my life beat his wife and kids behind closed doors and asked us to never talk about it. But yet he was the godliest man in my life. That's what everybody always told me. And so I decided as an 8-year-old boy, I didn't want to be a godly man, and that's what that looked like. And so I had this picture of following Jesus it was hypocrisy, it was abuse, and it was like pretending and performing. And I didn't want that. And so 8-year-old me, writing these words, I'll never be a Christian. So it got a little bit more solidified when my parents got a divorce later that year. And my parents got a divorce. I remember the pastor of this big church in a small town that my parents and I were going to. My parents got a divorce a couple weeks later. The pastor comes over to our house, sits us down, my mom and my 2 sisters and I, and says, we love you. We're praying for you, but just please never come back to our church again. It's embarrassing. Your family fell apart, and we don't want to be known as the church where people fall apart. And I instantly felt like I wasn't wanted anymore. I instantly felt embarrassed and ashamed. And as an 8-year-old kid who hated his dad and didn't want to be a Christian because of that, now it felt like I was hated by the church. I felt like an enemy and an embarrassment. And so, 8-year-old me was the furthest thing from ever wanting to turn to Jesus because I had this picture of what turning to Jesus looked like. And it looked like it hurt. It looked like it was full of pain and a lot of shame. And it wasn't until 8th grade, later on, single mom, 3 kids, 2 jobs to pay the bills, I convinced my mom to buy me a guitar.
So what age is 8th grade, just so we can...
8th grade, yeah. So for me, I was 13 years old.
13.
And, yep, I wanted to be... There's an artist, his name is John Mayer. And I wanted to be John Mayer. John Mayer got a ton of girls playing music, and eighth grade me was about that. Like that's what my goal in life was, just to swoon girls with music. And it didn't work, but I did get a guitar. I convinced my mom to buy me one, and she sent me to a music camp. And that music camp ended up being a Christian music camp, and I rolled my eyes every single day I was there. I was so over it. It's really hard to get girls singing "How Great Is Our God," by Chris Tomlin. It's not the most impressive song to impress a girl, but I learned these songs, and by the end of this camp, a guy got on a stage and he said something that changed my life forever. He said, "Don't judge Jesus on the broken people he came to save, because broken people hurt broken people, but Jesus wants broken people." For the longest time, I was embarrassed by my brokenness. For the longest time, I thought I was too beyond repair. I was ashamed, and I thought I really had judged Jesus on the broken people in my life, by my dad and a pastor who had hurt me, and a church who started rumors about my family. I judged Jesus on people, but I never met the guy. And it was at that moment that I realized I had a lot of brokenness, I had a lot of pain, I had a lot of frustration. And instead of hiding it and performing like I was perfect, I decided to just be honest for the first time in my life. And I accepted that I needed Jesus, and I was going to give it a shot. And it was right then and there that I met the healer of my brokenness. It was a shift in my life, in my heart. And I felt alive for the first time. And it was then 13-year-old me on the back row of a music camp that I didn't want to be at, that I experienced Jesus for the first time. Really, Jesus, not religion, Jesus. And I fell in love with Jesus, and I realized that I need to tell somebody about this. But I was scared to death to talk to people. Even doing this, like, this is the things that it's amazing to me years and years later that I get to do these kind of interviews because I was terrified to talk to people. Singing felt like my language, and that was what came easy. And so I remember going home and realizing, okay, I got to tell my friends, like, I accept Jesus, like I have to, but I can't, like, I'm terrified. So I just decided to write them songs. And so I wrote them songs, and I would call them up on the phone and be like, "Hey, I wrote you a song. Here we go. You need Jesus. 1, 2, 3," and sing these songs. And that's really how it started for me in my music career. I just started writing songs for my friends that were broken just like me and needed a savior just like me. And it was there when I was 13, I decided I wanted to write music for the rest of my life for broken people who needed Jesus. And that's still what I'm doing today. Thankfully, the songs are a lot less cheesy, and I finally figured out how to write music. But yeah, I would say that the time between accepting Jesus to now, I had a lot of people in my life who opened up doors that they may, I mean, in retrospect, in 2020, looking back, it's really just the hand of God. Youth groups opening up their churches for me to lead songs for their church, worship pastors letting me come in and sing at their churches on Sundays, and doing youth conferences and things. I was just a small town kid who just wanted to tell people about Jesus. And I still feel like that kid who just wants to tell people about Jesus. So that's how I really kind of came into what I'm doing now. Is I just want to write music and tell people about what Jesus has done for me and what he could do for them. And God's taken me on a crazy journey to get to this point, talking with you guys on Hope FM. But I'm grateful for the journey, and I'm grateful to get to do what I do. I'm still writing music for broken people who need Jesus just like me.
Wow. Austin, thank you so much for sharing stuff that it's tragic to hear, and it's also amazing to hear of just the way that Jesus stepped in and you did put your faith and trust in him. You're right. Jesus, the one who comes for the broken.
Yeah.
May I ask, do you still have the journal that your gran gave you?
I do not have that journal. I wish I had that journal. And there's a lot of things I wish I still had from kind of that season of, I had all these rock band CDs and things that I'm like, oh, I want to be these guys one day. And I remember Switchfoot. I do have this, the first Switchfoot record that came out. I didn't know they were a Christian band. And so I just decided, oh, this is the coolest band. Like, these guys are writing cool songs. And turns out the CD that I had no idea that these guys were singing about Jesus or pointing to Jesus. It was one of my favorite records. And then I accepted Jesus, and I'm like, oh, this is the coolest record ever. This is so cool. I want to do this one day. And so I still have that record.
So a nice inspiration. In fact, one of the questions I would have asked you is who's been your inspiration. So maybe Switchfoot could go down as one of those. People.
Switchfoot for sure. They definitely inspired me a lot.
Yeah, and we certainly played them here on Hope FM. Great guys. So can I ask a quick question? And it's kind of personal. The relationship with your dad, obviously, that was an absolutely horrible situation.
Mm-hmm.
Has anything changed there, or are you not in communication at all?
Yeah. So I hated my dad for a long time. And another thing that happened after I accepted Jesus, I started calling my friends and singing them songs. But one of the calls that I made after I got saved when I was 13 was to my dad. And I hadn't talked to him in a long time. And I called him up and I said, Dad, I think I'm supposed to love you. And I think I'm supposed to forgive you. I am not there yet. But I want to be one day. And I just accepted this guy named Jesus into my life. And I think he's going to help me get there. And that was it for me. That was the moment.
So when you said that to your father, when you said that you weren't there yet, but you wanted to forgive him and to love him, how did he respond at that moment?
Yeah, so that moment definitely caught him off guard. It was definitely something my dad wanted to run away from. He wasn't willing and ready at that point to accept the fact that he even needed forgiveness. It was a lot of pride, and our relationship suffered. It really did. But there was this work that started in me that I couldn't ignore. And the forgiveness had started on my end. And it was a process. I knew I wanted it to be reciprocated, but it wasn't there yet. And it wasn't until I was 18, I forced myself into a car ride with him that was like a 15-hour car drive across the states. And that was the first time my dad looked at me and said he was sorry. Almost 10 years after my parents split up was the first time my dad ever said those words. And that was the moment it felt like I got my dad back. And it's crazy. My dad is one of my best friends today. And man, when people tell me that there's relationships God can't heal, I don't believe it. Because I've seen, there was moments as a kid, as an 8-year-old kid, that I wished my dad was dead just because of how mean and hurtful and all the pain that he inflicted on us. But I've seen God restore what felt like unrestorable. And that's my dad. That's my dad and I's relationship. We're best friends now. We talk every day. And it feels like I got my dad back. And I have Jesus to thank for that.
You talked about being a dad as being sort of your primary thing that you want to get right, and being a good husband as well.
Mm-hmm.
Is there maybe a funny story of being a dad that has happened to you that just makes you chuckle?
Oh, every day there's something to be laughed at. And if you don't laugh, you cry, And so our kids are crazy. And I'll never forget, and my boys, we wrestle, and that's what we do. They love to jump on top of me and just feel like they're beating me up. And it's so fun. And we just love to wrestle. And so I'll never forget the day that I said, all right, buddy, I'm going to give you a wedgie. And they're like, Dad, what's a wedgie? And I'm like, oh no, maybe I shouldn't have introduced them to what a wedgie is. And so now their biggest thing out, just the other day we were at a playground, and they're playing with their friends, and they look them right in the eye and say, you better watch out, I'm gonna give you a wedgie. I'm like, no, you can't do that. Like, oh man. And that's the moment you realize, okay, yeah, every moment matters. And yeah.
There's sponges in anything you say, they're going to repeat. So that's
right.
That is a classic thing. And for anyone who's listening at home, and maybe in your vocabulary, the word wedgie means absolutely nothing, just go and ask someone in the younger generation. They'll explain it to you. But
exactly.
With the exception of Jesus, who would you say is your favorite Bible character? And why?
Yep, John the Baptist. What a gross dude. But that did not care except for one thing. to prepare the way for the Lord. And you know, I think he got something right. Maybe he should have showered more. But at the end of the day, he was dedicated to his cause, and I admire that from John. And what a great example that there's a lot of secondary things in life, and when you make Jesus the primary thing, let the secondaries be secondary. He took it a little extreme, you know, like showering and eating locusts and things like that. But his primary thing was what he's known for, right? He's known for telling people about Jesus and baptizing them, and making disciples. And so I don't know. I think sometimes we complicate ministry. And for him, it was real simple. It was just prepare the way for the Lord. And I like to think of myself as I want to be like that, maybe smell a little better, but have the amount of focus that John the Baptist did.
Yeah. Not getting caught up in all the trappings of life, but keeping things
Yeah.
simple with Jesus in the middle of it all. So
Yeah.
making the way straight. That's a great example. And you're the very first person ever on Hope FM to pick John the Baptist. So
No way.
nice
cool.
to be original, and for a very good reason too.
You've been watching The Artist Interview. For the full podcast, click the links below or visit hopefm.com/The Artist Interview.